and welcome to the Unpack It Podcast, where we unpack sermons, devotions, and the spiritual questions of life to help you grow closer in your walk with the Lord. Thank you for joining us today. I'm your host, Lexi Cannon. Let's get started. Well, thank you for joining me today here on the Unpack It Podcast. It has been a hot second since we've gotten together and chit-chatted. And I'm excited to be back. I've been on vacation and some other things, and but I'm excited to be back and recording this for you guys, the few of you that listen. I appreciate you, and I hope that you enjoy listening to this as much as I enjoy doing it. I love having Christ-centered, godly conversations. I feel like as a believer that fuels us, and not only us, but it fuels others, which is so important. It's one of the things we're called to do as Christians, is to kind of lift each other up. And I think having, spiritually deep conversations and checking in on each other and talking about the real stuff like that is part of that. And so I love recording these and digging into stuff, and I hope you all enjoy listening to them. So let's jump right in. I was a little torn of what to talk about this week. I originally had planned to speak on worship, and particularly music. If you notice in the background, we're playing a very worshipful song. It's called In Jesus' Name by Darlene Check. Go check it out after this. I'm sure you won't be able to hear it all because of my talking. But this song's awesome. I had the privilege of, I didn't sing it, but I played in an orchestra setting for a church service a few weeks ago, and this is one of the songs we did. It was really fun to play on the horn, and I'd never heard it until then, and the praise team that sang it at the church I was playing for, they just killed it, and in a good way, and it was epic, and I haven't been able to stop listening to this song. There's so much profound truth in it, and but we'll talk about that more when we talk about worship. But the reason why we're not talking about worship today is because we're gonna be talking about the book of Daniel. This will be a two-part podcast because there are 12 chapters in the book of Daniel, and you're probably thinking, oh, well, we'll do the first 6 and then the last 6. Well, I'm weird, and we're not. We're gonna do the first 8 and then the rest on part 2. The reason why we're doing 1 through 8 today is because that's how far I've read today. A few weeks ago, it was just really placed on my heart by God that I just need to, I need to pay attention to the book of Daniel, and I'm like, okay, that's weird, and it just kind of kept coming up in really random ways. Like, I was babysitting, and my kids wanted to watch VeggieTales, and we watched the Daniel and the Lion's Den VeggieTales. I'm like, okay, God's calling me to read the book of Daniel right now. I'm being led to do that. So I eventually got with it and started really spending some time in here. I have learned a lot. If you've never read the book of Daniel all the way through, and like I've said, I haven't quite finished it yet, so there could be more. We could go way more in depth next week, who knows. But if you haven't read it all the way through, I would so encourage you to, because I feel like so many people, when they hear of this book, their mind automatically goes to Daniel and the Lion's Den, which that's fine, because that's a big part of it, and we're going to certainly talk about that. But there's so much more that happened, and how God used Daniel and how God moved, and it's really one of those books in the Bible that you read it and you're like, what? Me too, bro. And because he struggles with things that I don't know if you struggle with, but like things I struggle with. I've written some notes. I've been reading on my Bible app. I do have a tangible Bible. It's ESV, and I have the first little bit. We will be referring to the notes I made in my tangible Bible, but later, as I started studying it some more, I found it was easier to read a different version. What I will be referring to when I read the scriptures throughout this tonight is the Message version, which I love. If you've never read the Message version, check it out. It explains things so well. And a lot of times, if you have an NIV or an ESV or even a New King James, I feel like New King James is kind of going out of style. Like, I mentioned that, and no one reads New King James anymore unless you're older. Which I'm like, okay, well, it was very popular when I was growing up. But anyways, I read ESV now, and but even if you're reading something in your normal standard version of the Bible, and you're confused, I'd encourage you, go to a Message version or a simpler version, or maybe a study Bible or something, and read it in that setting. Look at the notes, and it'll help you understand and process so much better, and just have some clarity in what you're reading. It's really hard to just, especially when you're reading the Bible, just to read and be like, I don't know what that meant, I don't know what I just read, and get kind of bogged down in it and be like, well, and it becomes a checklist. Well, I don't understand what I just read, but I've checked, my list off for the day. And in scripture reading and Bible study shouldn't be that. It should be an in-depth time with Christ. And I'm not always perfect at it, but I really try to grow and learn during that time. So I encourage you to do that as well. So, like I said, we're going to be jumping right in with chapters 1 through 8. And again, this is part 1 of our Daniel series here on the Unpack It Podcast. I'm excited. God has definitely revealed some things to me through this, and I can't wait to share it with you guys. For the sake of time, and because I trust that you all can read, I will not be reading, everything. But I do have a few highlighted verses here. And really the first chapter in my, it has titles and whatever. In the Message version, Daniel 1, the heading is Daniel was gifted by God. What it made me think, what does it mean to be gifted by God? Like, I think of this a lot. As most of you know, I'm a musician. And I feel like that's my God-given talent. I feel like I'm called to use that for Him. I really believe music is one of those things, you use it or you lose it. And also, and might just be me, but I have this kind of thought that, God's blessed me with this gift, and why would I not? I feel like this is maybe me, you may agree, maybe disagree, it may be me talking in my head, but I feel like it would be almost dishonoring to Him to not use the gift He's given me to glorify Him. That's why we're given our gifts and our talents. That's just my kind of thought on that. You may have a different opinion. I would love to hear it if you do. But that's me. And I really believe Daniel was very gifted. He was very intelligent. And we're going to talk about that in a minute, about all that he was. But I really believe that he used his gifts for God. And that is so important. If you're not actively, figuring out what are you gifted in, if you don't know that, try some stuff and figure out what you're good at. That's probably one of the things God blessed you with. I haven't really read a whole bunch about the spiritual gifts. I'm not sure if music is considered a spiritual gift. I think I have some other spiritual gifts, but I feel like music for me personally is a big asset and tool that God's given me and blessed me with, and I really try to just strive to use it for Him as much as I can. Because I feel like that's the best thing that I need to be doing. And I feel like Daniel did the same thing. Of course, he was gifted in other ways. So I'll be reading Daniel 1, verses 3 through 5. And this is just kind of talking about, I'm going to probably paraphrase it. Some of these names are tough, you guys, and I don't want to get here and butcher it, and then you go back and read it and be like, well, she butchered that. Because, y'all, I'm not a Bible scholar. I can't pronounce all these names. So, there is a king with a really weird name that starts with an A. So we're going to call him King A for these purposes, because I do not want to butcher his name, and you all laugh at me, even though I trust you wouldn't do that because you're all great people. But but anyways, this is verses 3 through 5, and it says, the king told Aspenaz, there we go, I think I got it, head of the palace staff, to get some Israelites from the royal family and nobility, young men who were healthy and handsome, intelligent and well-educated, good prospects for leadership positions in the government, perfect specimens, and indoctrinate them in the Babylonian language and the lore of magic and fortune-telling. The king then ordered that they be served from the same menu as the royal table, the best food, the finest wine. After 3 years of training, they would be given positions in the king's court. So, it goes on to talk about who these 4 men were. And it was basically, there were 4 guys from Judah. It was Daniel, and then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. In one thing I did not know, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were not their actual names, I don't think. And in the book of Daniel, they're referred to something different until we get to the story of the fiery furnace and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and then they're referred to as that. So that's very interesting. Daniel also has a Babylonian name as well, which I cannot pronounce. And when they start referring to him as King Daniel, they use, or in this version at least, they use his Babylonian name. But then it kind of goes back and says, oh, hey, by the way, we're talking about Daniel, in case you've forgotten. That's something I didn't know. I found it really cool. But basically, these 4 guys, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, were chosen to, go and work alongside the king and be treated and be to the finest food and be trained and given positions and leadership because they had gifts and talents and they were gifted by God. And that's the thing, when God gives you a gift, he usually is calling you. It's because he has a calling on your life. I believe that now you might have to do some searching for a little bit. I'm not here to say, okay, God's like hidden the calling for your life or whatever. Sometimes I feel like maybe it's a little in the obvious and we're not very good at seeing it. Or when I say we, I mean me. But once you get it, it's really, that it's a God-given desire in your heart, and it's a feeling like no other, and you finally clicks, and you're like, and that's what I'm supposed to be doing. And it's really neat. So, we're going to be talking about being gifted and being called. I believe everyone has a God-given calling on their life. You were created for a purpose. Like of course, our purpose is to make disciples and lead as many people to Christ as we can. But that's kind of, it's a little vague. It's like, okay, how am I supposed to do that? Everyone has different ways of how they're supposed to do that, and I feel like that's where the specific calling for you that God has placed on your life comes in play, where he goes, okay, this is the gift I've gifted you with, and this is how I am calling you to use that. This is how I'm intending you to do what your purpose is, which is to lead others to me and to glorify me. But this is how I want you to do it, and I think that's what your calling is. So here's the thing, Christ is, he said yes. He said you're called. He's given you these gifts. And usually when you begin to feel that calling on your life, it usually requires you, sorry, pop filter fell. It usually requires you to make a move. You don't really get to be like, okay, well, God's called me to this in my life, so I'm just going to live as everything's normal, You got to move. You got to say yes. You got to be willing to do what he is telling you to do, no matter what that is, because he knows what's best for you. I once heard a pastor say, God knows more about you and who you're going to be and what you want 10 years from now than you remember what you ate for lunch yesterday. Which is true, because when people are like, hey, what do you have for breakfast this morning? What do you have for lunch yesterday? Sometimes I got to sit there and I got to think about it. That's how spaced out I am, y'all. It's a problem. But yeah, that requires you to make a move. It ain't always a fun or easy move. I have known some people that have pursued God's calling on their life and had been pursuing it for many years, and God said, hey, you're getting complacent. We're going to move, and God had called them to do that, and it wasn't easy, and people thought they were crazy. They're like, what? That's the thing. When God calls you to do stuff, sometimes even Christians or your family, your friends, they're going to whisper in your ear and be like, what are you doing? Are you sure that's right? Are you sure God was calling you to do that? I think you're crazy for doing what you're doing. But you got to trust that he's leading you to do the right thing, and that that he knows what's best for you, and that you're really listening to him. Even if it's people that are in your family that love you dearly, you have to trust that God knows what's right, and he has your best interest. And you got to move when he says to move. And, I've gone through that. I've watched people go through that, and people sit there and whisper in their ear, you are crazy. What are you doing? You're making a mistake. But they knew deep down, okay, God's calling me to do this. God's calling me to make this move, and they did it, and it worked. And he had an intention for it, and he blessed it. I truly believe. And now, looking back years later, they realized that was the right decision. And I think you do that with every big decision or move in your life, especially when it is involved in what your calling is. in what you were designed to do. So once he says to make a move, he's going to direct you where and exactly what to do. Like, he's not going to be like, okay, I've called you to this, and you need to do this, and I'm just going to leave you. I just told you what to do, so you go figure it out. No, like, he is going to step-by-step guide you through that. Because he wants you to find your purpose and your calling for your life as bad as you want to find it. Everyone wants to know, what does God have for me? What's God calling me to do? What's my purpose? And he desires you to find that. He desires you to be fully who you were created to be. And the sad thing is, some people never find that. Some people never get to that. But God's designed you to, and desires for you to fully find that and just live it out. So that's kind of our overview of verse 1. And yeah, it's kind of the gifts and the callings and how important that is. In chapter 2, I didn't mean to say verse 1, I meant to say chapter 1, my bad. In chapter 2, King Nebuchadnezzar, I like to say that, Nebuchadnezzar, he had a dream, and Daniel ended up being the only person that could interpret that dream. And long story short, they're like, okay, this is it's the dream interpretation. It's called A Story of Five Kingdoms, and you can read this for yourself. But long story short, this is like a mystery. No one can figure this out. No one's smart enough to figure this out except Daniel. And Daniel basically says, he's like, well, I can't do this by myself, but it's God who gives me the wisdom to be able to interpret that, which, good for him for giving all the glory to God in that situation, because he's spot on with that. And basically, they just realize that God's the one who solves the mystery. God's the one that gives Daniel the power to solve the mystery. And in verse 46 through 47, this is Daniel chapter 2, it says, when Daniel finished, King Nebuchadnezzar fell on his face and all before Daniel. He ordered the offering of sacrifices and burning of incense in Daniel's honor. He said to Daniel, your God is beyond question the God of all gods, the master of all kings, and he solves all mysteries. I know because you've solved this mystery. And it was the dream that nobody, no one knew. No one knew what was going on. And that was cool for, these and this happens several times in this book. These powerful people, these powerful rulers, are seeing the power of God, and we'll talk about that some more in a few minutes because it happens again. In Daniel chapter 3, it talks about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and how they were thrown in the fiery furnace, and I'm sure we all remember that story. And how, they're like, hey, didn't we throw 3 guys in there? And they're like, well, there's a 4th one, and it's God protecting them. And the king, he realizes that God saved them. In chapter 6, I'm kind of skipping around a little bit, but talking about kind of the miracles that are talked about in this book. But in chapter 6, we have King Darius. I like saying that too, Darius. I know a guy named Darius. He's the worship pastor at my church. His name is Mr. Darius, and every time I think of King Darius, I think of Mr. Darius. So yeah, Darius, if you hear this, I hope that makes you laugh. But anyways, King Darius is on the throne now, and some stuff happens, and they make a decree that no one should pray to anyone but the king, and of course Daniel's faithful to God, and he's like, well, I'm going to do what I always do, which is he goes up in his house and he has the windows open. He lives in Jerusalem, and he has the windows open and he prays 3 times a day, just like he always does, and that's how he honors God. And he was taken for that, and it said in the decree, anyone who doesn't pray to the king is going to be thrown in the lion's den, and he was. And there was when God shut the mouths of the lions and saved him. And that's one thing to say, and we all know that story, but when you really sit and think about it, lions are big and scary, and you don't want to be in a dark hole with a bunch of lions. I don't want to do that. And, like, God shut the mouth of those lions and, like, saved him. And they pulled him out of that thing the next morning. He didn't have a scratch on his body. It's like, what ain't God good? Like, if you ain't giving praise for that, I mean, I don't know what's going to make you realize God's awesome. Because when you really sit and think about all that stuff, oh, it's so cool. And the thing is, like, and later, the guys that, turned him in and their family and their wives, they got thrown in the lion's den. And before they even hit the ground, they were being torn apart. So the same lions that didn't even touch or scratch or do anything to Daniel didn't let those other people even hit the ground. They were being ripped into shreds. Like, that is, I know that sounds very graphic, because it's like, it's one thing to, like, hear the little VeggieTales version of it, and then you read it in the Bible and you're like, oh wow, these were real people. This really happened. Like, it's like kind of graphic and weird and scary to read that, but it was true. It happened, and yeah. So there's several miracles that are talked about in this book, and it's just one of those things that makes you realize, the power of God, and it's like, that's the God we serve. Like, that's the same God who shut the mouths of lions and saved Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego from the fire. Like, we serve the same God every day. And I know it doesn't feel that way because we ain't seeing people, not get mauled by lions and whatever, but like, and people being raised from the dead. Yeah, when y'all see somebody raised from the dead, somebody call me. Let me know. I want to come see that. I want to come see a miracle. I'm Baptist. We don't get miracles. Like, Pentecostal people, they get miracles. And like, all kinds of stuff happening. I ain't ever seen a miracle. I just got to walk by faith and trust that they happen. Read them in the Bible and be like, well, that's cool. I ain't never seen it. Maybe I'll get to see one day. I don't know. But, yeah, Baptists, we just get to walk by faith. So, there we go. If there's a Baptist person listening to this, if you've seen a miracle happen, give me a call. We're going to talk about it. I like to talk about cool stuff that God does. So, shoot me a text and be like, hey, look at the miracle God performed, because I'll be very interested here, because I haven't seen many. As far as, like, people raising from the dead, lame walking type thing. But anyways, this book really portrays the miracles of God, and it's so cool and so special. In chapter 4, it talks about how King Nebuchadnezzar finally sees the power of God. And like I mentioned before, God's using Daniel to just reveal his power to all these leaders, and that's so awesome. And it's really neat to see that and see how he is doing that. So in chapter 4, we're looking at King Nebuchadnezzar here, and he's having this dream, and Daniel's interpreting it, and basically, after the dream's kind of revealed to him, he goes and he spends this time, like 7 seasons. I think it actually ended up to be 7 years, like in the wilderness. And it's like you're gonna graze the grass like an ox. That's what it says. That's his dream ended up being interpreted to that, and he almost kind of loses it for a little bit, loses his mind, and God restores his mind to him. And it says in verses 36 through 37, this is King Nebuchadnezzar talking. It says, at the same time I was given back my mind, I was also given back my majesty and splendor, making my kingdom shine. All the leaders and important people came looking for me. I was reestablished as king in my kingdom and became greater than ever, and that's why I'm singing. I, Nebuchadnezzar, singing the praises of the king, and singing and praising the King of heaven. Everything he does is right, and he does it in the right way. He knows how to turn a proud person into a humble man or woman. Like, a powerful king. This is the same guy, too, that built the golden statue, and he's like, hey, all y'all are going to bow down to this, and then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego didn't, and he threw him in the fiery furnace. Like, that guy kind of loses it, has to go spend some time in the wilderness, and goes, hey, God's powerful, and he's the true living God. That's cool. And God uses Daniel to do that. I don't know about you, but I haven't convinced a king that God's the true living God. I think that'd be cool. I would love to be able to do that. I don't think I have the self-confidence to do that. But Daniel did that, and how awesome that God used him in that way. And that's just one of the examples of having these leaders, like I've said before, just realize his power. In chapter 7, we're seeing that Daniel is king at this point, and this is his first dream or vision. Here's the thing. This is the biggest thing where I was like, I said at the beginning of this, the book of Daniel for me has been a very, oh yeah, me too, bro, book. That sounds kind of stupid saying it that way, but like it's been very true. I've related to it. And it's because, the biggest thing is because of these visions and dreams. A lot of these visions and dreams are weird and involved animals with horns and things like that. You can go read them. Very interesting stuff. But like he had some weird dreams, and it talks about a little later, and we will talk about this in chapter 8. I read this morning, actually, and was hit pretty hard by it. How he responds to this. And he's a little weirded out. And I'm going to be very raw and honest here. I have really weird dreams. Like, I guess I'm just creative person. I don't know. But, like, I have had some weird dreams. And it's like the kind of dream you wake up in the morning and, like, you remember every detail of it. And you're like, that made no sense and really freaked me out. And as a believer, my instinct is to be like, okay, because I know God speaks to people through dreams and visions and things like that. And I believe he still does that kind of stuff. So if it's something really weird that's like really pressing on my heart, and usually I'll wake up and that's just like all I can think about the rest of the day, then I usually go, okay, are you trying to tell me something here? Like what's going on? Why was that weird? Or why was that person in that dream? Or why did this actually happen in real life, but like it really strongly replicated what happened in my dream? Like it's weird. I'm weird like that. I don't know if any of y'all are weird like that, but I just have some freaky dreams. And Daniel does too. And I'm like, wow, this is cool. And he responds to them a lot of times how I respond to when I have weird dreams. And I'm like, okay, I don't know what that was, but it's freaky weird. And Daniel's the same way. And this first dream he has, it was really kind of freaked him out. But the thing I noticed was in chapter 8, and it says, it was his 3rd year as king, and another vision came to me, Daniel. This was now the second vision. So this is the second vision or freaky weird dream that he's having, and it goes through this, and it says, then I overheard 2 holy angels talking. One asked, how long is it that we see here? How long is what we see here going to last? Sorry, tripped over my words. The abolishing of daily worship, this devastating judgment against sin, the kicking around of God's holy people in the sanctuary. Okay, quick side note. Not to be political or anything, because I try not to do that, but if any of you people have watched the news or keep up a little bit with what's going on in our world today, you can't tell me that you don't read that and be like, excuse me, hashtag current America? That it says the abolishing of daily worship, the devastating judgment against sin, the kicking around of God's holy people in the sanctuary. Like, I'm not going to go in detail about what I think that is today. Like, I'm going to let you draw conclusions for yourself, whatever you believe that is. You might not believe that's anything. Good for you. But for my personal beliefs, I do. And it sounds very similar to what we walk through today. And I found that profound that happened. And I even wrote in my notes, on the Bible app, you have a little thing that wrote, and I said, excuse me, current day problems. Some of my notes are really silly. But yeah, I'm going to let you interpret that for however you want to for yourself. But that really stood out to me. Daniel goes on to talk about his dream and what he thought about it. And in verses 23 through 26, it says, as their kingdoms cool down and rebellions heat up, a king will show up hard-faced, a master trickster. His power will swell enormously. He'll talk big, high-handedly, doing whatever he pleases, knocking off heroes and the holy ones left and right. He'll plot and scheme to make crime flourish, and oh how it will flourish. He'll think he's invincible and get rid of anyone who gets in his way, but when he takes on the prince of all princes, he'll be smashed to bits, but not by human hands. The vision of the 2,300 sacrifices evening and morning is accurate but confidential. Keep it to yourself. So this is Gabriel, the angel, kind of interpreting the dream for Daniel. And so, it's kind of ironic. Daniel is over there interpreting everybody else's dream, and then he has a dream, and an angel comes and tells him what his dream means, which is kind of cool. I'd be freaked out if that happened to me. But, I think he was freaked out too. We'll get to that in a second, though. But it says, this is accurate but confidential, and keep it to yourself. So he's just had this freaky weird dream, and he can't tell anybody. Like, how weird is that? And then Daniel, it says it refers far to the future. And Daniel says in verse 27, I, Daniel, walked around in a daze, unwell for days. Then I got a grip on myself, and I went back to work taking care of the king's affairs, but I continued to be upset by the vision, for I could not make sense of it. If I'm being really raw and honest, there have been times where I have had really freaky weird dreams like that, and I've walked around in that daze and just not knowing what it means. And I wrote in my notes, I said, so Daniel basically just had this dream about the end of the world, end times, and you can read it for yourself. It clearly, I would think, the way I kind of interpret it, I think it's kind of talking about end times revelation type thing. Very interesting how this is portrayed in the Old Testament, and I feel like the Bible does that a lot, and it's quite cool, actually. But, so he's having this dream about the end of the world, and he was confused and scared, and kind of in a daze by it, and he couldn't tell anybody. And then the thing is, no one would probably believe him anyways, because the vision was so wild and crazy, and it was about the far-off future. And I really feel like in this moment, Daniel was probably going, hey God, what in the world's going on? Like what you doing? I would be. When I have weird dreams, I tend to do that. Like, what does this mean? And I sometimes I talk about mine. Daniel can't talk about it. It's so wild, it's so crazy, it's so unforeseeable, and he can't say a word about it to anyone. And he's just in this funk. That was a Me Too bro moment. And it was really cool to see how God was able to use that. And when I talk about the first dream, I said, so this is now Daniel's second dream. The second dream in chapter 8. And it said, I feel like he must have woken up after each dream a little confused and even frightened, and I probably would be as well. Probably wondering where God was and what in the world was he doing. And despite all the good things God had done, including shutting the mouths of lions and sparing his life, he probably deep down knew that God had some type of plan, but did he ever wonder what his purpose was? Did he ever wonder how he went from being a regular guy to getting promotion after promotion until he was finally king? Although he served and obeyed well, and God favored and blessed him with many gifts, was being king the desire of his heart that God granted him with? I feel like, and I might read later and kind of find out that, but right now for me, those are some unanswered questions. Like, did he want to be king? Or was he a little shy of that, and God said, I'm trusting you with this. I've gifted you in this way. I've called you to do this. I know you can handle the freaky weird dreams. It's going to freak you out. You're going to wake up in the middle of the night and be like, that was weird, God, where you be at? Like, I'm sure he did that. But, God knew he can handle it. God entrusted him with that. The fact that God sent an angel and said, hey, you're going to have a dream about the end times. It's going to be super crazy. And by the way, you can't tell anybody. It's probably going to bother you a little bit. God's with you, though. It's cool. Keep your mouth shut. That's hard. And God entrusted Daniel to handle that. And God was with Daniel through handling that. And then you might just be like, oh, it's a weird dream. But when you have those weird dreams and you realize how it can throw you off sometimes, just as we see it threw Daniel off. it's very interesting. And that's something I've walked through. I'm not sure if any of you have. So that is our notes so far on chapters 1 through 8 of Daniel. I hope you have gotten something out of that. I know for sure I have. I have never taken time to read this book all the way through, and it has been God's really revealed some things to me, and it has been so cool to unfold. That doesn't happen for me a lot, because I probably do not study the Bible as diligently as I should, if we're being honest here. But I have been, and I felt very pressed to read this, and I'm dealing with some callings, and making some moves in my life, and I figured, okay, God said read the book of Daniel. I'm dealing with some things. Let's do what God says, and I did, and it has been extremely helpful. Which, of course, God's helpful, and He's God, so He knows what's best, and it's been very cool to have these Me Too Bro moments. I hope you've had those as well. I hope you've gotten something out of this and you've enjoyed our time together. I look forward to discussing part 2 as we discuss chapters 9 through 12 and wrap up our Daniel little mini-series. And then we'll see what's next here on the Unpack It Podcast. So, hope you all have a good day and a blessed week. And I will see you next time right here on the Unpack It Podcast. Bye. Well, thank you for joining us today on the Unpack It Podcast. We hope during your time here you have learned something, taken something away, and have grown closer in your walk with the Lord. We look forward to seeing you next time right here on the Unpack It Podcast. Have a great week.